Imagine what your life would look like if you could accomplish everything you've ever set your mind to. No postponed dreams, no unfinished projects, no gnawing feelings of regret lingering in the back of your mind. What if I told you that the greatest enemy to your success isn't the world out there, but an almost invisible saboteur lurking in the shadows of your own mind? The truth is that procrastination is more than just a bad habit. It is the silent killer of potential, the thief of dreams, the insidious enemy that keeps us trapped in mediocrity while we secretly yearn for greatness. Throughout history, the most extraordinary achievers have understood a fundamental truth that the masses have overlooked. The ability to take immediate, decisive action is what separates the exceptional from the average. When Napoleon Hill interviewed hundreds of the most successful individuals of his time, he discovered that they all shared this rare ability to conquer procrastination and transform thought into action without delay. These were not people blessed with superhuman willpower from birth. Rather, they had methodically cultivated specific mental frameworks that made procrastination nearly impossible. And in the next 30 minutes, these exact frameworks will be revealed to you in such precise detail that you'll wonder how you ever allowed procrastination to control your life for so long. Have you ever noticed how some days you wake up filled with determination, promising yourself that today will be different, only to find yourself, hours later, caught in the same patterns of delay and distraction? This constant cycle of commitment and failure doesn't just rob you of productivity. It gradually erodes something far more precious: your belief in yourself. Each time you break a promise to yourself about what you'll accomplish, a tiny fracture forms in your self-confidence, in your very identity as someone capable of achievement. The most devastating impact of procrastination isn't the unfinished tasks. It's the person you slowly become as you learn to distrust your own word to yourself. What makes this battle against procrastination so challenging is that we've been conditioned to misunderstand its true nature. Society tells us procrastination is simply laziness, a moral failing of the undisciplined mind. But this fundamental misdiagnosis is precisely why so many intelligent, capable people remain trapped in its grip despite their best efforts. The revolutionary insight from Napoleon Hill's research reveals that procrastination is actually a complex psychological mechanism, a protective response of the subconscious mind to perceived threats that exists in everyone, not just the so-called lazy. This reframing changes everything because once you understand the actual machinery behind your procrastination, dismantling it becomes not just possible, but inevitable. I'm about to share with you a system for eliminating procrastination that has transformed the lives of thousands who thought they were permanently condemned to lives of unfulfilled potential. This isn't about trying harder or implementing yet another productivity hack that works for a week before fading away. This is about fundamentally rewiring your relationship with action itself, using the exact psychological principles that Napoleon Hill discovered in the minds of the most accomplished individuals in history. By the end of our time together, you'll possess a set of mental tools so powerful that procrastination will seem as foreign to you as the thought of breathing manually does now. The question isn't whether this approach will work for you. The question is whether you're ready for the person you'll become when procrastination no longer limits what you can achieve. The first step in conquering any enemy is to truly understand its nature, and procrastination is no exception. Most people believe procrastination is simply the act of delaying important tasks, but this surface-level understanding is precisely why so many remain trapped in its grip. According to the research conducted by Napoleon Hill across decades of studying human achievement, procrastination is actually a sophisticated defense mechanism of the subconscious mind, a subtle form of self-protection against perceived risks. When you understand that your mind isn't lazy but rather cautious, you begin to see procrastination not as a character flaw, but as an outdated psychological response that once served a purpose, but now limits your potential. Consider for a moment why you procrastinate on certain tasks, but not others. Have you noticed that you rarely procrastinate on activities that bring immediate pleasure or satisfaction? The tasks you delay are typically those associated with some form of discomfort, uncertainty, or the possibility of failure. Napoleon Hill discovered that the human mind is programmed to move toward pleasure and away from pain. But critically, this system operates based on anticipated, not actual, experiences. Your subconscious doesn't distinguish between genuine threats and merely uncomfortable growth opportunities. It seeks to protect you from both with equal vigor. This explains why even when you consciously want to complete a task, another part of you seems determined to avoid it at all costs. The cost of not understanding this psychological machinery is immense. When you misdiagnose procrastination as laziness, you attack the symptom rather than the cause, creating an endless cycle of self-criticism that actually reinforces the very behavior you're trying to eliminate. Think about it. How many times have you berated yourself for procrastinating, only to find yourself procrastinating again shortly after? This happens because self-criticism activates the same threat response system that triggered your procrastination in the first place. The mind registers the emotional pain of self-judgment as yet another threat to avoid, and the cycle deepens. This insight alone, that criticism cannot solve a problem created by the fear of emotional discomfort, was revolutionary when Napoleon Hill first articulated it, and it remains the key insight that most productivity systems miss entirely. What makes procrastination particularly insidious is its ability to disguise itself as reasonable behavior. Have you ever noticed how logical your mind suddenly becomes when justifying why now isn't the right time to start that important project? I'll do it when I'm more prepared. I need to do more research first. Or, I'll wait until I'm feeling more inspired. These seemingly rational thoughts are actually sophisticated excuses manufactured by your subconscious to maintain comfort and avoid perceived risk. Napoleon Hill called this phenomenon creative avoidance, the mind's remarkable ability to create plausible justifications for inaction. Understanding that your own mind is capable of this level of self-deception is crucial, because it allows you to recognize these thoughts as symptoms of procrastination rather than valid reasons to delay. The final piece in understanding procrastination's true nature is recognizing its connection to your self-concept and identity. Napoleon Hill observed that people don't just procrastinate on tasks. They procrastinate on becoming the person they know they can be. There's a profound comfort in potential that remains unfulfilled, because as long as your dreams remain in the realm of someday, you never have to face the possibility of trying your hardest and still falling short. This fear of discovering your limitations often runs deeper than the fear of failure itself. Many people unconsciously prefer the pain of disciplined mediocrity to the vulnerability of wholehearted striving, because the former preserves the comforting belief that greatness remains possible if only they would someday try. Recognizing this deeper psychological pattern is essential because it reveals that conquering procrastination isn't just about getting more done. It's about becoming brave enough to discover who you truly are and what you're truly capable of achieving. If you could somehow calculate the true cost of procrastination in your life, the figure would likely be so staggering that it would propel you to immediate action. Napoleon Hill often spoke of the unseen penalty of procrastination. Loss is so gradual and subtle that they accumulate without notice until one day you wake up wondering where your dreams went. The most obvious cost is unrealized potential. The businesses never started, the books never written, the skills never mastered. But beneath these visible losses lies something even more devastating: the slow erosion of your relationship with yourself. Each time you break a promise to yourself about what you'll accomplish, you teach your subconscious mind that your words cannot be trusted, that your commitments lack substance. Over time, this creates a kind of inner division, a subtle but persistent conflict between the part of you that sets intentions and the part that carries them out. This inner fragmentation produces a particular kind of suffering that's difficult to articulate but universally felt among those who habitually procrastinate. It's the peculiar anguish of living with constant internal pressure, of carrying around an ever-growing mental list of incomplete tasks and unfulfilled aspirations that silently drain your mental energy, even when you're not consciously thinking about them. Napoleon Hill referred to this as the burden of unfinished business, and he observed that it creates a background level of anxiety that prevents you from ever being fully present or at peace. The procrastinator's mind is never truly at rest, because even during leisure, there's the nagging awareness of what remains undone. This cognitive load doesn't just diminish your happiness, it fundamentally restricts your ability to access your full creative potential and mental resources. Perhaps the most insidious cost of procrastination is what Napoleon Hill called the compound interest of inaction. Just as money grows exponentially when invested, so too do the consequences of delay compound over time. Consider a simple example. If you delay starting a retirement account by just 5 years, you don't lose just 5 years of savings. You lose all the compound growth those earliest investments would have generated over decades. The same principle applies to every area of life. The novel you don't start writing today isn't just delayed by a day. You lose the feedback, improvements, and opportunities that would have emerged from having completed an early draft. The business you don't launch doesn't just postpone potential profits. It postpones the invaluable learning experiences and network connections that would have compounded over time, making success exponentially more likely with each passing year. Beyond these personal costs lies an even greater tragedy: the impact of your procrastination on others. Napoleon Hill emphasized that we rarely consider how our unfulfilled potential affects those around us and those who might have benefited from our contributions. The medicine never discovered, the invention never created, the business never launched, the book never written. Each represents not just a personal loss but a loss to humanity. You may tell yourself that your procrastination hurts only you, but the truth is that your unrealized gifts represent a form of silent selfishness, keeping for yourself what might have served many. This perspective shifts procrastination from a personal failing to a moral responsibility, especially for those who recognize that they possess capabilities that could meaningfully improve the lives of others. When you truly internalize these hidden costs, you begin to see procrastination not as a minor behavioral quirk, but as a form of self-betrayal, a daily decision to sacrifice what you could become for the temporary comfort of remaining as you are. Napoleon Hill noted that the most successful individuals he studied had all reached a turning point where the pain of continued procrastination finally exceeded the pain of taking action. What if, instead of waiting for that crisis point, you could make that decision today? What if you could fully grasp, on an emotional level, that the comfort you feel when avoiding difficult tasks is actually a form of slow-motion suffering that costs far more than the momentary discomfort of action? This shift in perspective, seeing procrastination as more painful than action, is the psychological fulcrum that Napoleon Hill discovered could leverage even the most entrenched procrastinator into a person of decisive action. What separates those who consistently take immediate action from those who delay? Napoleon Hill's research revealed that the difference isn't willpower or discipline in the conventional sense. It's the presence of specific psychological frameworks that make action automatic rather than effortful. The first of these frameworks is what he called definiteness of purpose, a clarity about your goals so crystalline that it eliminates the deliberation that typically precedes action. When you know exactly what you want and why you want it, with absolute certainty, the decision-making process that often consumes time and energy is eliminated. Instead of wondering whether you should act, your mind shifts entirely to how you can act most effectively. This is why those with a burning mission procrastinate less. They've removed the space for doubt where procrastination typically flourishes. The second psychological framework involves reconstructing your relationship with discomfort. Napoleon Hill observed that average achievers attempt to avoid discomfort, while exceptional achievers learn to reinterpret it. Rather than seeing the tension of challenging work as something negative to be avoided, they recognize it as the sensation of growth itself, the feeling of capacity expanding. This perspective shift transforms the very trigger for procrastination into a signal for action. Imagine if the emotional discomfort that currently causes you to retreat instead became a reliable indicator that you're moving in exactly the right direction. The initial resistance you feel toward important tasks would no longer be a barrier but a compass, pointing you toward the actions that will yield the greatest growth. Another crucial framework Napoleon Hill identified was the practice of acting as if, making decisions based on the person you intend to become rather than the person you have been. Most people decide what actions to take based on their past patterns, essentially allowing their history of procrastination to predict their future. Exceptional achievers instead make decisions based on their vision of their ideal self, asking, "What would the person I am becoming do in this situation?" This future-oriented decision-making bypasses the limitations of your current identity and allows you to act from a place of aspiration rather than habit. When facing a task you would typically avoid, simply asking yourself this question creates immediate psychological distance from your procrastination patterns. The fourth framework is particularly powerful: restructuring your relationship with failure. Napoleon Hill discovered that chronic procrastinators tend to view failure as permanent and personal, while consistent action takers see it as temporary and informational. This difference in perspective changes everything. When you believe that failure might reveal permanent limitations in your capabilities, procrastination becomes a way to protect your self-image. But when you view failure merely as feedback, valuable information about what doesn't work, taking action becomes less threatening. The question shifts from "what if I fail?" to "what will I learn?" This simple reframing neutralizes the fear that fuels procrastination and replaces it with curiosity, one of the few emotional states strong enough to override the fear of discomfort. The final psychological framework that Napoleon Hill emphasized is perhaps the most counterintuitive: the practice of taking action before motivation arrives. Most people believe the sequence is, feel motivated, then take action. But Napoleon Hill's research revealed that for consistent achievers, the sequence is reversed. They take action, which then generates motivation. This insight completely inverts the conventional approach to procrastination. Rather than waiting for the right mood or inspiration, you must recognize that those feelings are most often the result of action, not its prerequisite. By taking even small steps without waiting for emotional readiness, you trigger a positive feedback loop where initial action creates momentum, which produces results, which generates motivation, which makes further action easier. This action-first approach is why those who conquer procrastination often report that the hardest part of any task is simply beginning. Now that you understand the true nature of procrastination and the psychological frameworks that make action automatic, it's time to implement a definitive system for permanently eliminating this obstacle from your life. Napoleon Hill's research revealed that lasting change requires more than knowledge. It requires a structured approach that systematically dismantles old patterns while building new ones. The system I'm about to share with you integrates all of Napoleon Hill's insights into a practical methodology that has transformed the lives of countless individuals who once believed their procrastination was an unchangeable part of their character. The foundation of this system is what Napoleon Hill called the decision of mastery, a single, definitive moment when you commit with absolute clarity to conquering procrastination, not just for a day or a week, but permanently. This isn't about trying a new productivity technique. It's about making a fundamental decision about who you are becoming. The psychology behind this commitment is crucial. You must reach the point where you see procrastination not as an occasional behavior, but as fundamentally incompatible with your identity. This requires creating what Napoleon Hill called an emotional crescendo, a peak emotional state where the pain of remaining the same finally exceeds the perceived pain of change. To facilitate this decision, write out in vivid detail the costs procrastination has already exacted from your life, and the even greater costs it will exact if allowed to continue. Then, draft a personal declaration of independence from procrastination, stating with absolute certainty that you no longer accept this pattern as part of your life. With this foundation in place, the next step is implementing what Napoleon Hill called the principle of immediate initiation, the practice of taking action within the first 25 seconds of having a productive thought. Research has now confirmed what Napoleon Hill intuited. The longer you delay after having an impulse to act, the less likely you are to follow through. This is because the mind's initial resistance to important tasks is strongest at the moment of consideration and diminishes significantly once action begins. The practical application is simple but transformative. Whenever you recognize that something should be done, immediately take a small but concrete step in that direction before your mind has time to generate excuses. Don't wait for the perfect moment or until you feel ready. Those conditions almost never arrive. This isn't about completing the entire task in that moment. It's about crossing the threshold from inaction to action, which is where the battle against procrastination is truly won or lost. The third component of this system addresses what Napoleon Hill identified as the primary psychological driver of procrastination, the tendency to become overwhelmed by viewing tasks in their entirety. To counter this, he developed what he called the principle of minimum increments, breaking down any goal or project into such small initial steps that the mind cannot generate resistance to them. The key insight is that procrastination feeds on ambiguity and perceived complexity. By defining a starting point so ridiculously simple that it would feel more awkward to avoid it than to do it, you bypass the psychological resistance entirely. For example, instead of committing to write a book, commit to write one sentence. Instead of cleaning the entire house, commit to cleaning a single countertop. Once these minimal actions are initiated, the psychological momentum they create naturally leads to continued action, often far beyond the initial commitment. The fourth element of the system directly addresses the underlying fear that fuels most procrastination, the fear of imperfection. Napoleon Hill observed that highly successful individuals adopt what he called the standard of imperfect action, the philosophy that taking imperfect action consistently is infinitely more powerful than waiting for perfect action occasionally. This requires a fundamental shift in values, placing higher importance on consistency than on quality in the early stages of any endeavor. Make it your personal standard that anything worth doing is worth doing poorly at first, because this eliminates the psychological pressure that makes beginning so difficult. Paradoxically, this acceptance of imperfection at the outset leads to far greater quality in the long run, because it provides the real-world feedback and practice that perfection-driven procrastination prevents you from ever receiving. The final component of this system is what Napoleon Hill called the principle of public accountability, strategically sharing your commitments with others in ways that make follow-through more likely than avoidance. The psychology behind this is powerful. Human beings will often do more to avoid social discomfort than to gain personal benefits. By thoughtfully leveraging this tendency, you can transform what was once a barrier into a source of motivation. This doesn't mean broadly announcing your goals, which research suggests can actually reduce follow-through by creating a premature sense of accomplishment. Instead, it means selectively sharing specific commitments with individuals who will hold you to them, creating concrete consequences for inaction. The most effective form of this accountability includes regular check-ins at predetermined times, specific deliverables that must be completed, and consequences that are meaningful enough to override the temporary comfort of procrastination. As our time together draws to a close, I invite you to pause and reflect on the journey we've taken. We began by revealing the true nature of procrastination, not as a character flaw or lack of discipline, but as a sophisticated psychological response to perceived threats. We explored the hidden costs of this pattern, costs that compound silently over time until they form the boundaries of a life smaller than the one you're capable of living. We examined the psychological frameworks that make action automatic rather than effortful, and we outlined a definitive system for implementation that transforms these insights into lasting change. What stands before you now is not just information, but a crossroads, a moment of decision about who you will become and what relationship you will have with your own potential. The wisdom Napoleon Hill uncovered through decades of studying human achievement reveals a profound truth. We do not rise to the level of our goals. We fall to the level of our systems. The insights and strategies shared today are not merely techniques to try. They are a complete redesign of your relationship with action itself. Implementing them requires more than intellectual understanding. It demands a willingness to experience temporary discomfort for lasting transformation. The question is not whether these principles work. The question is whether you will work them until they become so deeply ingrained in your psychology that taking immediate action becomes as natural as breathing. The divide between knowing and doing is where most potential remains forever unrealized. Will you be among the rare few who cross that divide, who transform knowledge into habitual action? Consider for a moment the trajectory of your life if you continue with your current patterns of procrastination. Visualize with unflinching honesty where those patterns will lead in 1 year, 5 years, at the end of your life. Now contrast that with the trajectory your life could take if, beginning today, you implemented these principles with unwavering consistency. The gap between these two trajectories represents nothing less than the difference between a life of quiet regret and a life of expressed potential. This gap grows wider with each passing day, as the compounding effect of either action or inaction gains momentum. The actions you take in the hours and days immediately following this message will determine which of these trajectories becomes your reality. This is the weight and the power of the present moment. It is where potential is either converted into reality or surrendered to comfort. What makes this moment particularly significant is that you now possess something many never receive: a clear understanding of both the problem and its solution. Napoleon Hill observed that ignorance, not knowing what to do or how to do it, is rarely the true barrier to achievement. The real obstacle is knowing but not doing, understanding but not applying. With the knowledge you now hold, procrastination can no longer hide behind confusion or uncertainty. It can persist only through conscious choice, through the decision to prioritize momentary comfort over lasting fulfillment. This clarity creates a unique form of responsibility. The responsibility that comes with seeing a path forward that cannot be unseen. From this moment forward, continued procrastination is not just a passive pattern, but an active decision to reject the very freedom and power that Napoleon Hill's wisdom offers. The most profound insight Napoleon Hill shared about human potential is that transformation rarely happens gradually. It happens in moments of decision that instantly alter the trajectory of a life. This could be such a moment for you, not through some magical intervention, but through the simple yet powerful act of deciding, with absolute conviction, that procrastination is no longer an option in your life. Imagine making this decision not just intellectually, but with every fiber of your being. A decision so complete that the very thought of returning to old patterns becomes as foreign as returning to childhood. This level of commitment is available to you right now, in this moment. It requires no special circumstances, no perfect timing, no permission from others. It requires only your willingness to step fully into your power and claim the life that becomes possible when action is no longer optional but automatic. If the insights shared today have resonated with you, if you feel the stirring of possibility and the readiness for change, I invite you to make this conversation just the beginning of our journey together. The principles of Napoleon Hill have transformed countless lives, and the ongoing exploration of these ideas can continue to deepen and expand your own transformation. Subscribe to this channel and join our community of individuals committed to expressing their full potential. Share your experiences in the comments below, both your challenges and your victories, because your story may be exactly what another person needs to hear to begin their own journey beyond procrastination. Like this video if it has provided value, as this helps others discover these transformative ideas. Remember, the greatest insights become powerful not when they are understood, but when they are applied. The time for understanding has passed. The time for action is now.